suhoor bites. Or wait a minute,
Nailed it. Did you open the wrong file?
I got the wrong file.
Yep,
All right, here we go. To the Habibis podcast. That's what it is. Who
There you
also
go.
sometimes
Yalla,
features
yalla.
suhoor bites.
Yes.
Right.
It's
It's
three
almost
game-
Ramadan.
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks from now, right?
Exactly. 3 game developers drinking good Arab tea. I'm your host for today, Fauzi Mesmar.
And I'm Osama Dorias.
And I'm Rami Ismail.
It's been so long since we last did one of these, huh?
I mean, we recorded the live episode 2 days ago. We're recording this now. People won't hear this until like Friday.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So
did anybody do a lot of things in the past 48 hours?
How much can you do in 2 days? Well, a bunch, actually.
yeah.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I mostly played more Flight Simulator.
Yeah. I drove to another city to see my brother. He just bought a house and he had a big family get together. So, I mean, I did, excuse me. I did play
Drink
a
more
little
tea,
bit.
Osama. Clear that
I have
throat.
it here right next to me.
Put some honey in.
So I did move the needle a little bit on Death's Door. I beat that boss that was giving me a hard time, and I moved to the next one. So that felt good. That game is tough, but it feels fair. It feels like every time I beat a boss, I'm like, yep, okay, I figured out the pattern. Now I'm going to be able to do better for the next one, and the next one surprises you. So I'm happy about that. Beyond that, yeah, two days. Didn't have much time to do much else.
Okay, fair.
You mentioned that you've been playing Flight Simulator, Rami. Did you also
Yep.
take Osama on some flights, maybe?
Not in the last 2 days, but we have to
No,
set up another.
we did fly a bunch of times.
Yes.
But yeah, not yet. I'm teaching Osama how to fly, basically.
It's hard.
It's been fun.
Yes, it's really fun, but it's actually much hard. Like, you know, that feeling you get when you start playing a game, because we've been playing for so long that I should be able to do this. I have that with Flight Simulator, but man, it's so frustrating when it's not working the way you intend and you really believe that you did every step of everything, and then your plane crashes and you realize that you forgot one thing in the middle. But in Flight Simulator, that's like catastrophic.
Right.
You forgot to press
forgot-
one button, or
Forgot to turn on the autopilot.
yeah, that was one time, Rami,
Right.
and you won't stop talking about it.
No,
It's
of course
just-
But it's interesting because these airplanes are obviously their own interface, right? And they're highly specialized interfaces. They're made for people who really know how they work. And the basic interface is quite straightforward, right? You have your rudder, you've got your yoke, you've got your throttle, and then in some of them you've got like fuel mix and other stuff. But like a basic airplane works very much like a car, only the pedals are not the accelerant, right? So you can technically kind of learn to fly an airplane mid-flight,
Mm.
right? Just the basic stuff. You would just very likely mess it up because you don't understand what forces you're sort of dealing with. Because an airplane. Am I going to explain how an airplane works?
Yeah,
like in
go
short.
for it.
Okay, so an airplane is odd, and because obviously there's gravity and air involved, right? A car stays on the ground, so you can accelerate and you can decelerate, and it doesn't really affect anything besides your speed.
On the
Right.
y-axis, unless you really
Right.
messed up. But
Right. Then you should stay on the road and not go off the cliff.
pretty much.
In airplanes, you're trying to balance a number of forces. You're trying to balance gravity against speed, and if you lower your speed, and then you have something called your attitude, which is kind of like the way the airplane is pointing, like up or down. Basically, the rule is that if you want to keep flying, you need to be flying in such a way that you're countering gravity as perfectly as possible, right? If you want to climb, you want to have more lift than there's gravity. If you want to descend, you want to make sure that you are losing you are losing the fight against gravity, just very controlled. And to do that, you have to balance the angle of your airplane, you have to balance the speed of your airplane, and you have to balance sort of like the throttle, the amount of power that you're adding to the airplane.
Mhm.
Which means that if you start descending, you actually gain speed, right? So you actually have to, if you want to descend, you have to point your airplane in such a way that you're descending, but make sure that it's not gaining too much speed, because then you die, which is bad. If you want to climb, you want to add speed. If you don't add speed, or you can't add more power to the airplane, then you slow down and eventually you fall, which is also not great because you might die. And a lot of these things are recoverable, right? Like a stall is actually like something you practice for if you learn to fly airplanes. But it's scary if you don't know what's happening, right? And Osama stalled a lot.
Oh, all the time. There was one flight where I was stalling nonstop, and when I stopped stalling, I was worried. I'm like, wait, what did I do right? How do I repeat this? It's not as easy. That's the time he took me to Mount Everest, and there's a
Right.
lot of turbulence all the time. So I'm constantly being pushed upwards and downwards. I just don't go straight for most of the time.
Rami, have you? Go ahead, Osama.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to ask Rami, like, he's clearly very interested in Flight Simulator, knows a lot about planes. Have you considered, learning it?
I did. Question.
I did. In the early 2010s, I was doing practice for a license, but I never finished because I couldn't afford it as like a 19-year-old.
Oh, fair enough.
So I could only do a training like once every more than a month. It was usually like a month and a half. Before I could do another flight, and then Vlaambeer, my game studio, took off, and I just didn't have time to finish. So
took off without you having a pilot license,
right?
So you didn't need a license for that.
Yeah, right. You're lucky you didn't crash.
Right. So I actually hoped when sort of COVID was taking off that I'd be able to kick it back up again and do it now.
Yeah.
But then they stopped taking new students immediately when COVID started.
Oh, that's a shame.
So,
because a good friend of mine got his license maybe a year or two before he hit his 40th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he started, not as a young buck at 19 for sure.
Right.
And like, he takes me on flights sometimes here in the city, and it's been pretty dope. So like, as you talk about Flight Simulator, I think of him and the stuff he showed me on the plane that he was flying, because he's flying like, those smaller size stuff.
Yeah, Cessna probably.
Yeah. So like, a lot of the stuff that you're saying just resonates because of what he was saying to me on the flight.
Yeah. No, it's fun. Did your airplane have the wings above or below you?
On the side.
Next
below me. Yeah.
Right. That's a lot of people fly the Cessna model, which is or one of the Cessna models, and they traditionally have wings above, and it's funny because that's actually a real problem during flight if you're flying something called a pattern, which I taught Osama as well.
Yes.
If you fly a pattern, you need to sort of be aware of what's above and beneath you, and it can actually be dangerous if you have two people flying planes with the wings at the different end.
Oh,
okay.
So if one person is flying with the wings above and one person is flying with the wings under them, they can't see each other. Which is kind of a problem. So
it was one of those things. It was one of those things that, like I used to think that the world's a lot more complex than it is.
Right.
Because when we were on the plane, I was like, so you must have some kind of like, sophisticated device that tells you where the where the other planes are and stuff like that. And he was like, no, you just look at the windshield, and if you see a plane, you try to avoid it. I was like,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of and that's VFR, right? Like visual flight rules. So you fly by eye effectively, and there's a bunch of stuff you need to know about like radio and about like how maps work to make sure that you can fly that way properly. Yeah. And the way you land is doing those circuits that I was talking about just earlier. So there's sort of like a rule of how to fly to an airport. But beyond that, it's mostly like, let's just make sure that we talk to each other and that we don't hit other airplanes. They're kind of small. The air is kind of big. So it's generally possible to avoid it, but you really have to pay attention.
Yeah. It was quite an experience because he gave me the the stick, and he was like, don't go too strong, just tilt it a little bit, and like the feeling of actually moving the plane around was pretty cool, nerve-wracking, but cool.
Yeah, it's funny because you all know that like airplanes, when they first started being used in war, they were just for reconnaissance, and the first time they were used in war in combat, you had two pilots, and one of them would actually shoot a gun, a physical gun, at the other pilots from the other side. Like that was how it started before they mounted miniguns and it became actually weapons of war.
That's like some GTA stuff, you know?
Yeah. We've gone full 360 on that one.
And this is how the rendezvous got inspired. One guy did a looping, and the guy in the back was like, "No, I don't have my seatbelt." Oh.
Which button is the seatbelt? Which button is the eject? Oops.
But yeah, no. So teaching sort of like the basics is really fun because obviously I don't know. I like teaching people stuff. It's just a thing that I enjoy. I do it in Destiny.
You're
I do
good
it in
at
Flight
it.
Simulator.
You're very patient. Like, I was messing up like crazy, and you're like, "Oh yeah, you crashed. It's fine. Let's start over."
Yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah, we just wasted 20 minutes. I'm totally okay with that.
No, but also you learned for 20 minutes.
Yes.
So like we're making progress, right?
Yes.
I mean, it didn't end well, but
you have to rub it in. I was waiting for that.
But
this is why he's patient, because he gets to rub it in later.
That's the
But at
payoff.
the same time, if you crash after 20 minutes, you didn't crash for 20 minutes. So I would call that a great success.
You're right. I was not crashing for 95% of the time.
Right. So in general, I think it all went really well. Like, and the circuit, we need to teach you to put a little more distance between you and the runway before you make your final turns. Because Osama ends up doing like a 180-degree turn in that airplane, like somehow. Which is not great for lining up for the runway, especially not if you don't know how to control the airplane fully yet. But beyond that, he's taking off, he's landing, he's flying, he's turning on autopilot if he has the time between stalls. And,
oh man, this is very encouraging. There's no better motivator than to rub it in your face when I finally get it right.
It has got to be great.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's been good, and just flying wonderful places. Like there's one airport that I really like where Osama and I flew a bit called Serena Station.
Yeah,
and it's basically a runway it's just like a beach with a giant forest, and they just cut a runway out of the forest.
It's so beautiful,
and that's it.
Yeah,
it's like you take off between trees, and then suddenly you're over the beach, and before you know it, you're over the water, and that's it. And you just set it to like sunset times. You just take off, you just fly a few circles, and you land back before the sun goes down too far, and you can't see the runway anymore because there's no lights. And that's kind of it. It's great.
And if you miss, it's fine. You just get a little wet. It's not a big deal.
Right. Probably don't miss. There's a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Those aren't built for tree impact.
Nope.
But yeah, it's been fun. And just doing lots of like fun flights, like trying new places to fly from. The Lukla approach from Everest was really, really fun.
Yes,
it's just beautiful on all sides.
We have to try that again because I don't want to. I don't want my only attempt at that to be a failure.
I mean, honestly, if your only attempt at that was a success, you could just quit Flight Simulator and just retire. Like that's you should not make that landing. That's the point of that landing.
Yeah,
it's really hard. You have to get all your variables right, and even then, it's like a tricky landing.
I love that you showed it to me second. You're like, okay, you landed your first time. Good. This is what you have to aim for.
Yeah, it's kind of a teaching strategy that I learned. It's like, okay, let's show people that they can do it.
Yes.
Which is important, right? Because if you show people something that is immediately impossible, it's not good enough. But I kind of believe that after you've shown people that they can do something, you should show them that there's a lot to learn.
Exactly, 100%.
And I don't know. I've always kind of kept that teaching style from, I don't know where I was taught it, but I always just kind of kept that, and I always appreciated it, and it always worked for me. So
yeah, it's brilliant.
I have a good time with it. Plus, I get to watch you like almost make it, which honestly, I was very impressed that you got that far.
Well, thank you. I'm super happy to hear that because when I failed, oh my god, like my heart sank.
Let's put it. Let's put it this way. I did something called Twitch Flight Simulator, where I made the chat of my Twitch channel control the airplane.
Oh no!
Right, and. Eventually they learned to land an airplane.
Okay.
Which was incredible. That took like 40 or 50 tries.
Wow.
We just took off at a random airport, flew around a bit, and then landed. We fell like a little short of the runway, but the airplane still landed. It didn't explode or anything. And then later on, as the chat got better, I decided to make them do the biggest achievement flight in Flight Simulator, which is there's a flight from Bordeaux to Seattle, and Bordeaux is where Asobo is, and Seattle is where Microsoft is. So that was the flight that the team had to do as they were developing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And they put that in the game as a achievement.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Wow.
It's a 9.5-hour flight.
Yeah.
So you take off, you set it to autopilot, and you go. And then after 9 hours, you check back if nothing is on fire. After 9 hours, you land the airplane and you're done, right? Flight Simulator is an odd game. So I thought, what if I don't turn on autopilot and I just let Twitch fly it? And Twitch flew the airplane through trolls, it failed like 2 or 3 times, but through trolls, through people trying to crash the airplane, through people like trying to like stall the airplane or like, let the gear down mid-flight. Eventually, we made it to Seattle. We were on the approach, and right before landing, I got nervous, and I accidentally made a typo, and I set the engines to minus 25% thrust.
Oh no!
Which is reverse thrust. So, about 75 meters from the runway, we crashed.
Oh no!
After 9.5-hour flight.
Oh no!
Your landing was at Lukla is effectively that. You got it all the way right, despite the turbulence, like navigating the valleys, the mountains, all of that. And then you just didn't make it to the runway.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of physics going on in that landing. It's really hard. So, the fact that you got there is honestly super impressive. The same way Twitch getting to Seattle was really impressive. It's really sad to see the little crash mark like 25 feet from the runway, but the journey there is honestly as impressive. So
I really hope that your Twitch stream is not a metaphor for humanity. We'll get there. We'll get really close, and at the very end,
I mean, so the next attempt they actually did land it.
Yeah. Okay,
so Twitch succeeded a 9.5-hour flight purely through chat with no autopilot, which was incredible.
Your move, Osama. Your move.
That's it. But I'm not ready for my second attempt yet. I want to succeed my second attempt.
Lukla is really hard. There's a really fun 747 landing at an airport called Paro as well, which is probably the hardest 747 landing I can think of.
Oh.
So as soon as you have a bit more control of the jetliners, we'll go there sometime.
I'm excited about that. And Fauzi, you're hearing all this, and you're not interested in joining us? Like, we can do it at 3.
Dude, I would love to. My time is kind of nuts, but
yeah, I can imagine.
Whenever I can find something that can match your guys' time zone, even though Rami is technically within my time zone, but
he's not really.
He is physically within my time zone, but his mentally he's in yours.
Yeah,
I'm an ephemeral creature. I'm just awake whenever somebody wants to play Flight Simulator. Like, no worry. Like,
yes, and you're ready for the podcast a day in advance, which is amazing.
Right? Oh my god,
that's so funny.
I woke up yesterday and I was like, "Oh my god, it's 4:03." I'm like, ran to my computer. I sit down. I open Discord. I'm like, "I'm awake. I'm awake." And then I look at like, "Why aren't you here?" And I look at the day. I'm like, "Wait, oh, it's Saturday, isn't it?" That was wild. I woke up in like a panic. I'm like, "Oh no, I need to do this."
Oh man, that's so funny.
Yeah,
I've done exactly that before.
Didn't even have tea.
Oh no, you can't podcast without tea.
You can't do the podcast without tea, man.
Speaking of which, I actually met. Oh man, what are they called? I think they're called the Grand Dames. It's another.
What?
It's kind of another
type of dog.
No, dames, not Danes.
Okay.
So the Grand Dames and their grandmothers who play and review or discuss video games, and they also do it while drinking tea. So we have competition, boys.
Oh no!
Yeah, look them up.
We don't have competition. We don't have competition. They're better than us.
Exactly.
I bet we have gold. Is what I
lost.
meant.
This is like if we are still doing this podcast in 30 years, then we'll be even.
Yes,
but
they
otherwise,
were really lovely too. And honestly, we should do some kind of a joint tea party event with the Grand Dames. I'm just putting it out there.
That sounds great.
Us in 30 years, it's like 3 game developers measuring their diabetes.
and drinking Arab
And
tea.
drink Arab tea.
I mean, for me, it's not going to be diabetes. For me, it's going to be high blood pressure. I don't know. This is like the most Arab thing.
It's
in
the
history
Arab
of
thing. It's
mankind.
either blood pressure or diabetes or both.
Those
Like,
are
it has
our
to be
two
one of the
options.
two.
Yeah,
That's
cholesterol's not far behind. Let's be honest.
right. Cholesterol happens, heart stuff, but like the heart stuff, it's not a thing that like affects your day to day as much. I
Yeah.
think like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
It's one of those four, and then we just kind of like roll the dice. I think for me, it's going to be the blood pressure.
You know, we should open up a pool and take bets. No, let's not do that. I said it as a joke, but even then it sounded too dark.
Yeah.
But looking at Middle Eastern desserts, you kind of understand why diabetes is a problem. I mean, like,
yeah.
seriously.
It's like take anything and put 10 times more syrup than you would ever imagine you would need.
I just got a gift of Bal Hasham yesterday.
Oh,
but great gifts. A family member got back from Egypt yesterday and brought a large just jug of fresh mango juice.
Oh, I love mango.
Like
Ooh,
frozen
I love
solid
that stuff. Mm.
frozen solid when they left, and by the time it arrived in my fridge, it was already like starting to turn back into like water, like juice again.
Awesome.
So I have a giant jug of mango juice sitting in my and I have to admit, I thought of swapping out my tea for the mango juice, but Egyptian mango juice is just
So we have a few stores here actually that import different Arabic drinks and foods. We're lucky in Montreal because we have a lot of areas that have high concentration of Arabs. So we have multiple what you would call Arab towns.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of them is like Little Maghrib, that's not too far from my house. And there's another one that is mostly has Lebanese and Syrian people close to Saint Laurent. And there's a high concentration of Iraqis close to NDG. That's actually where I grew up in Montreal. And all of them, like we have pretty strict language laws in Quebec where, yeah, like people who know, they know. So when I say we have Arab signage, it's always second place to the French. Like as a rule, we have to have bigger signs in French. And there's a history and a precedent and real reasons for that historically that I'm not going to go into. But the Arab signage in these areas will be second. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal for a place with such language laws. Do you both have any experiences like that? Like, do your countries have Arab towns as well?
Yeah, man, it's funny that you mentioned it. Just like I think it's on the same day that we did the live episode after work. I wanted to go for dinner, and a friend of the show who actually lives in Stockholm was like, "Come, I'll show you the Arab town in the city. I've never been, to be honest."
Oh.
And then, like, as soon as I step out of the train station, it's the music. You're like, dum, dum, taka, taka, dum, taka, taka. I'm like, oh, what's going on? It's just, I just stepped foot out of the train station. It's just loud music. There's kids running around everywhere. And, like across the road from the train station, there's the dude that's beating ice cream with the stick, the Syrian style. And if you guys have ever seen this, like you're making ice cream by beating it with a giant stick. And then there's like the staple three old dudes of any Arab town. There'd be like two dudes, like like old men, walking, like pacing around with their hand tied behind their back. They're wearing their finest suit and they're holding like a rose bead, as they're walking by. The third guy was also an old man who is still in his bathrobe, and he's clearly wearing his wife's flip flops. Like they're like pink and they're like plastic, and the three of them are walking by talking politics very, very loudly. And that's when I realized, like, oh my god, I'm definitely in Arab town.
Right.
And I started walking around, and like all the signs are in Arabic. So like the place I immediately stepped out of the train station for, I looked at, it's called Al Bayt Al Dimashqi.
Okay.
And they're selling like all sorts of Arab desserts. I stepped in, man. I had kanafa. I had like some Arabic coffee, and then I bought like I think half a kilo of halawa jibne, like the cheese dessert.
Yeah,
so good.
That sounds incredible.
The other thing I got back from Egypt was Bal Hasham, which is it made me think because Osama was saying like just too much syrup, but it's basically just like a dried sort of semolina type of cake thing with just like honey poured over it for like days in the shape of a date.
Yeah,
that's it.
Wow.
It's like ridiculous, and then fried a little. It's
Why not?
right
At that
there.
point.
In Egypt, we have them a lot, and I used to love them as a kid. We don't really have an Arab town in the Netherlands, not that I know of. I mean, we have sort of like Arab neighborhoods or neighborhoods where the Arabs are more common.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't really think of like something that culturally defines itself as Arab. Maybe the large cities have, right? Like maybe Amsterdam has it, or Rotterdam, or The Hague, or. But I feel like the sort of like Arab diaspora in the Netherlands, they cluster, but they're not as loud about it, I think.
Oh, I see.
I'm not quite sure why.
Now,
I also have to admit, like
Montreal, we're extremely loud about it. Like if you
Right.
have a park that's near one of these Arab neighborhoods, especially Little Maghreb, and you go near the park, I don't know what it is about us Arabs and why we gravitate towards the park, but you'll see people bringing chairs and tables into the park and playing cards. Like it looks like a giant cafe on grass. It's like
Right.
that, and it's loud, and everyone's talking. And it's everyone's welcome. It's not just Arabs who go there, of course,
Right.
but like you can clearly see that there are tons of the Arabs, and they just come out and they take up a lot of space, and it's a beautiful thing, honestly.
Right. Yeah. So we don't really have that here. And the other thing that I always notice when it comes to sort of like the Arab diaspora is, it seems a lot of the Arabs like cluster together well. I don't think the Egyptians tend to. It's really odd, but you can always sort of find like the Lebanese, you can always find the Syrian, you can always find the Iraqi, but Egyptian. Like the Egyptian is usually making shawarma somewhere, right? Like let's be honest. Like 90% of the Egyptians open a shawarma joint.
Here, that's not. That wasn't my experience. My experience here is like many, and I've spoken to you about a few, but many of my friends growing up were Egyptian. So maybe it's different from country to country, but here, like we all stuck together, and It's not even like. Well, we're not even talking about just Arabs. Like I have a whole bunch of friends who are just brown, just like Pakistani, or I speak a little bit of Urdu, or I understand a little bit of Urdu just because of how many friends I had. So I guess it depends on the size of the community, because what I've found is when the community becomes really, really big, it's easier to find people of just your ethnicity, and then maybe you branch off at that point. But I've been here for a long time, and the communities when I was here at the beginning were really, really small. So I would be interested to know, if you ask a 20-year-old Iraqi instead of a 40-year-old Iraqi, as myself, do they still mix now that the communities have had another generation to grow?
I'm not sure. I mean, I always knew a few Egyptians in the Netherlands, but it was never like we have a really large Moroccan community in the Netherlands. Finding Moroccans was always very easy. We have Turkish folks, sort of like same region-esque. So Moroccan and Turkish are sort of like the main Muslim/brown immigrants to the Netherlands. But Egyptians was always pretty rare to find. And every Egyptian I knew had a shawarma joint. So that's kind of like, my dad was the exception, which was always funny because I go like, oh, my dad's Egyptian. And other Egyptian kids would go like, where's your dad's store? I'm like, no.
Funny thing happened while like I'm at this place. Because I went into the supermarket in this Arab town, which is like, it felt for me very predominantly Syrian and Iraqi, by the way, from the accents I hear, and I was speaking Arabic the entire time. So went to the supermarket because I was like, oh, since I'm here, I'm going to buy a whole lot of ingredients to make all sorts of food. And I walk in and like, it's a supermarket on one side, and they have like all these like, cheeses and McDoos and all like this delicious stuff that I bought a whole lot of. And on the other side, it's a spice shop. We have all these spices in the sacks.
Ooh.
You guys know what that's like, right?
Yes,
so, like,
absolutely.
It's been a while since I've seen like all these sacks stacked next to each other, like in a supermarket. So I was standing there taking a photo of it because I wanted to post it on our Discord. And then the dude comes over and was like, what are you taking a picture of the spices for? And I was like, I haven't seen this site in a while, so it's kind of making me nostalgic. And he's like, okay, in Arabic. Okay, show me the photo. So I showed him the photo that I took. And he like immediately, like the Arab thing, he immediately wants to one-up me. It's
Yeah,
like
he wants to take a better photo.
it's like no. See my phone. See the camera on my phone. It's way better. Let me take a photo for you. And he just goes ahead and takes a photo of the spices, and he goes, "Give me a number. I'll send you the photo of the spices."
Yeah.
And I give him my number, and the dude not even WhatsApps the photo. He sends it to me as a message.
Right.
When was the last time you sent the photo as like a text SMS, man?
I mean, to be fair, that has never been possible in the Netherlands. Our SMS never supported images, so the answer is never in my case.
Yeah, it's almost close to never in my case as well. And I looked at that guy, and like, I'm also Arab, man. Like, I can't just take it. So like, I look at the photo and go like, your camera is better, but I have better framing.
Yep. Needs to happen. You can't just let that slide.
I can't let him one up me and just sit there and take it.
No, and then just accept the photo. Like, ain't happening.
It's okay photo. I'll post both photos. I'll post both photos on the Discord, and then we'll let people
don't let
decide
us know which one is which.
Yeah, exactly. You guys say which is the better framing and camera.
When this episode is out, it'll end up in the Discord.
We'll vote for it. I love it.
Oh my god, that sounds great. Yeah, no, I would love to go to a place like that. In the Netherlands we have this black market, Beverwijk, it's what it's called. That has a relatively large Arab population.
Wait, what do you mean by black market?
So it's a tolerated market where the tax rules don't really apply.
Okay.
It's all underhand.
So it's like a flea market, because black market to me, it means like explicitly illicit.
Yeah.
So
buying illegal stuff.
Yes.
Technically, it just literally means that there's no record of what is bought or sold.
Yeah.
Right. That's the official meaning of a black market.
A haggler's paradise.
Yeah.
It's off the books, and that's exactly what it is. It's a haggler's paradise. A lot of the stuff you can buy there is not technically copyright proof. You know, there's not really taxes on purchases, right? You just pay for the thing and you buy it, and it's sort of like accepted as a tourist destination. Yeah. So we just kind of leave it.
This is where you can go and get your Habibis flip phone.
Right, your Habibis, your photo phone, your Nokia,
your Nokias,
your police stations, your Nintendos, your satellite receivers, your illegal decoders for the satellite.
For us, like for the longest time, that was our Chinatown. They've cracked down on it, sadly, in the last few years. But before, that was where you'd like, oh, you want a movie? Well, here's one with, you know, the picture like posted on, and here's one with just me writing with a marker that's $1 cheaper. Which one do you want? That kind of thing.
Yeah, the 480p DVD rip.
Exactly.
On it, burned onto a disc.
Exactly.
With, like, and the illegal satellite receivers are my favorite thing, because my dad buys a different one every 6 months, and he's like, this one. I was at the market, and this one is much better according to the guy that I bought it from. I'm like, did you tell him which one you have? He's like, no, he just told me this is better. I'm like, how do you believe this man if he doesn't know which one you have? He's like, he said this is the best of the best. That's the best. And I installed the thing, and it's just a different box with the same Android like based OS on it, doing the exact same thing. So my dad just keeps buying new satellite receivers every 6 months, and it's not even a satellite receiver at this point. It's like a over LAN kind of thing.
Okay, my question is, what's wrong with the one that he has that he wants something better?
Nothing. He's just one-upping himself.
Osama, it's an easy one. Like, this one gives you 250 channels of languages you don't understand.
Right.
The other one gives you 300. It's easy. Of course I want the Greek channels.
Right.
Why wouldn't I?
Who wouldn't want the Greek channels?
So yeah, I end up installing a new one of those every 6 months, which is great. But it's a great market, and it has always been the one place in the Netherlands that felt, even though it's not an Arab place, it felt like it has sort of an Arab culture to it. Right, because you're running around, you're looking at the thing you want, then you're like, your dad like gives you a like slap on the back of your head, and it's like, don't look at the thing you want. It's like, oh, sorry. It's just, you know, good foods. Everything smells great. There's like smell of spices. There's a smell of like tea. There's smell of like food. People are yelling at each other in the background somewhere. And you can't tell whether they're fighting or just happy.
Yeah.
Everybody's negotiating about everything.
They're
Like
both.
it felt very homey.
They're both
they're
fighting
both, right.
and happy.
Right.
They're happy because they're fighting.
Right. They're happily disagreeing about the price of a thing.
In Berlin, there was also a
Respect.
very sizable, like Arab town part of town, and like they had like all of these things that you talk about. You know, the shawarma joints, the restaurants, the supermarkets, and of course the coffee shops with like outdoor seating, shishas, and football. There's always a football match, and there's a
There's always
group of
football.
people watching football, and they're discussing which is the best football. Even though,
Right.
like off season Olympics, if it's
Right.
football, it's showing in an Arab cafe somewhere. There's a group of
Right.
people watching it.
Well, watch the B classes. It doesn't matter as long as there's a ball going around.
Actually, there's something like come to think about it, something very interesting about the Berlin version of Arab Town, because Berlin is like this hip alternative city. Like it gravitates a lot of like artistic types and hipsters and like IT people. Like it's a mishmash. It's a giant city, very cultural and all of that. Originally, like in the east side of Berlin is where a lot of like the minorities used to live. So like the east side of Berlin is where like the ethnic food started emerging, and
Right.
therefore because it was also like the cheap part of town. So like they all lived there, and then like ethnic food started to be found there, and then it became the party part of town because that's where everybody
Right.
wanted to live, where like
Yep.
where everything is happening. To the point that so many like people moved there to the point that it became very expensive. So the
Right.
minorities started to go elsewhere. They went to
Hmm.
basically, and that's when the refugees also and like other people coming. They all went to Arab town, which is Neukölln in the south of Berlin. So that became like the where a lot of the ethnic food started emerging and all of this, and then soon the artists and the hipster types and everybody else followed. And now it's a very interesting contrast because it became also a party center. So so you can sometimes see like a group of people queuing for shawarma at 3 a.m. and they're like all in like Berlin style party outfits. So like
Right.
there's like a very interesting contrast that's happening because of that. I think no other city in the world would have something like that in that sharp context that's very noticeable as in Berlin. So I find that very, very interesting.
Okay, so there's two communities I wanted to talk to you about right now that you just like sparked in my head. So the
Go
first
for it.
is what I found is really interesting is that Toronto particularly had a lot of communities or like a lot of areas that were the merger of two communities that you wouldn't normally expect. Like the one that I saw the biggest contrast in was the area which has the most Persians also has the most Koreans, and you
Huh.
see a street with Korean and Persian signs back to back over and over. You could
Wow.
Google like those images, like Toronto Korean, but this is common. Like you'll go to a place and it'll be like I'm trying to remember another one. I want to be accurate, but it's like Haitian and Chinese or something like that. And it's just like this in this area is both these places, like both these people in big numbers. The second is the biggest Arab community that I've seen in a Western area is actually in Michigan, in close to Detroit. It was like if you don't know where you are and you turn around, you really believe you're in an Arab country. Every single sign was Arabic for like blocks and blocks and blocks. A lot of people were Arabs. That was the biggest community. It's the place is called Dearborn. It's not too far from Detroit. If you Google Dearborn, Michigan, you'll see it's like they took over that area, and a lot of the new politicians that are coming from the states that are of Arabic descent are often from Dearborn or live in Dearborn because that's how big it is. Yeah. So those two, if you ever have a chance to experience that, those two places are unique in my opinion. So, like the communities in Toronto that are like the fusion of two different communities and Dearborn specifically.
That's super cool, man. Because coming like in Europe, I think this is becoming a little bit more common than what it used to be. Like I don't think it was the same as the States or Canada in terms of like there's larger communities of a lot of different Arab minorities coming. I think just because of the influx of Arabs that came into Europe over the past 5 years. But like when I was in Japan, for example, getting like Arab food or Arab ingredients was so difficult. Like
I can imagine.
I knew of like two Arab restaurants around Tokyo. One of them was in Yokohama. Like I had to like
Wow.
travel for 45 minutes to like really get some Arab food in Japan. So like and in New Zealand there wasn't also that much. I think there was a lot of other minorities from Asian descent within New Zealand, but like not that much like Arab community. So like I've also like only found like one restaurant in Auckland that I used to go to for like Arab food and stuff of the like. So it's kind of like cool to see that uh, Arab communities are quite at a large scale in different cities here in Europe, and like you can go there and get some ingredients and some stuff that I kind of like really miss. That are harder to come by, but they're actually easy to get to.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
I'm wondering if this is going to be a trend in some countries like Japan, and you're going to see more and more of them in recent time. Is there anything like stopping it from being more widespread, like in other areas?
I just think it's like the number of the population. I guess there's not that many
Right.
Arabs in Japan. Like there's a lot of like there's a Koreatown or a Chinatown in Tokyo.
Did you ever see that video of the Japanese ambassador to an Arab? I forgot which Arab country. He spoke Arabic with a Japanese accent.
Yes, I see that on Twitter. I think.
Whoa!
It was the wildest thing because
Yeah.
I'm used to our accent.
Yeah.
I'm not used to other accents. I'm not used to like hearing Arabic spoken with like a Japanese like. What was it? It was the cadence that was very Japanese.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
The
It didn't sound
emphasis,
like
the
Arabic.
phrasing.
Right. I was just like, wow. I had not, because I feel like we're very used to talking about the discussion of how does an Arab integrate into another society. We're not really used to the discussion of how does somebody else integrate into Arab society.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's true.
Right. So that was it was mind blowing to me. I was like, wow.
There was
Okay, this is cool.
There was a Japanese author that spent 40 years in the Arab world. Speaks fluent Arabic. Lived in the Levant. He lived in Egypt for quite some time, and then he ended up writing a book in Arabic called "An Arab from a Japanese Point of View." Arabs from a Japanese point of view.
Yeah.
I want to read that.
And it's fascinating to read. Matohoro Nagai, I think is his name. Let me look it up to make sure that I'm not throwing us. Sorry, it's Nobuaki Notohara is his name.
Novaki Notohara.
Yeah,
Okay.
he wrote like a book in Arabic. It's like 150 pages. Don't think it's ever been translated to English. It's just in Arabic, and it's he just describes how Arabs think. And I find it fascinating that his tech it's in Arabic, so it's pointed back to the Arabs, not to the Japanese.
Right.
So it's trying to tell them like this is how you guys appear to somebody that's not one of you.
Right. That sounds fun. I want to read that.
It's fascinating. I highly recommend it. I think I might have a copy somewhere. I send it over to you, man.
Yeah. Well, or just give me the name. I'll buy it.
Yeah.
I want that. I want to read that and then put it in my book cabinet to point at.
We'll do for sure.
It's a good story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very curious what they have to say.
Right. I mean, I've heard Arab with a French accent a lot.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yes.
because the languages mix in places, and like obviously Montreal exists.
Yes.
But
France
also
has
like
a lot,
Maghreb exists,
Exactly.
France
Yeah.
exists. So,
This is
but
also
other
like
languages. What is the Arabic with a German accent sound?
I think pretty sure you'll be able to hear a lot of that actually.
Yeah, and my friend Ahmed is Arab living in Germany. Maybe I'll ask him.
Right. But did his Arabic change, or does
don't
his
think
German
so.
have an Arabic accent?
No, but imagine that there's like a bunch of kids that'll be born, to Arab
Right.
parents there or something like that. So there'll be
curious.
some kind of accent coming out of it.
Right.
Which actually reminds me, like, 'cause one of the things I've did over the past couple of days is that maybe it's another book recommendation. This one's a graphic novel for Osama since he loves comics.
I do.
This is a book called The Arab of the Future. Because I need to make sure of what it is in English. I'm reading it in German because they're faster the translation. So It's
I need 75 extra pages. But
yeah, the speech bubbles just bleed out always. It's by a guy called Riyad Sattouf. He's French Syrian, and it's a memoir in graphic novel format. It's called The Arab of the Future. 5 volumes have been released of this so far. It's not finished yet, so I'm up to date with this 2020 one. It's 160 pages for every volume almost. For me, it's fascinating because it's talking about himself, so it's autobiographical. It's Riyadh himself talking about his parents. His dad was Syrian and his mom was French. And then his dad was a university professor, and he convinced the family to move. That he wanted to live back in the Arab world again. So he drags the family back, and they live in Libya, Syria, and Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And the wife and the kids along with them. Fascinating.
I'm looking at some panels now, and they're like provocative. I'm actually really curious to see what the rest of the graphic novel is. I'm adding it to my list. I'm really grateful.
It's super good, man. I really enjoyed it. I think there's an English translation. So I read the first one in German and the 3 of them in English. But then the 5th version, they still haven't translated that to English yet. And I couldn't wait. So I just got the German version and read that. Yeah, it's great. I recommend it. Some parts can be tough to read sometimes. But I think it's thought-provoking.
I can't find it on Comixology, so I think I'm going to have to order a physical copy.
It's interesting because this kind of thing, this sort of honest exploration of the problems and the issues that exist in Arab society, right?
Yeah.
I think they're very important to have, but the discomfort I always end up having is that there's not a lot of good examples of our society that are lifted up as big as this one. Because I'm looking at the critical reception, and there's incredibly well received, right? New York Times described it as exquisitely illustrated and filled with experience of misfortune bordering on the farcical. No, that's just an Arab's life. What are you talking about? This is not farcical. This is just what life is like. Come on. Disquieting yet essential read. And I think for a lot of us, seeing that sort of stuff it feels familiar. Right?
Yeah.
It's the same reason we laugh about the ship, or about some of the stuff in our past where you're that's actually a little messed up. But we laugh about it because it's one of the few things that we get to bond over that is just sort of ours, that hasn't been warped by outside society as a bad thing. And I was talking about this the other day on the episode 2 weeks ago. About representation, is that it seems that the examples of Arab representation that really get lifted up in the global mind are the examples of liberation from Islam, or liberation from the Arab world, or self-actualization in an oppressive society. Those are the stories that people want to hear. The stories of the hijab coming of, and it makes it sad that these very honest stories, these very personal stories, end up falling in that camp a little, even though they're genuine and they're real, because we don't get to tell the good stories. We don't get to tell the stories of Eid, or just a good life in the Arab world. All the literary sort of tradition that made it here is the Cairo trilogy, right? Naguib Mahfouz and this. And you're just why are these the things that keep getting lifted up into the eye? I mean, it looks gorgeous. I'm absolutely going to read it because it looks incredible. And it seems very genuine, right? It as I'm sort of reading over this seems like a real thing. Smell is also vividly represented throughout the novel. I'm yep, that sounds about right. How are you not going to do that?
Exactly. So I think it's it's important to have work that celebrates both parts of reality, right? It's presents something that's full circle, not like one dimensional that just confirms the zeitgeist. That's like, where I think closer in autobiographical work, and I believe graphic novels and these kinds of work has been doing a little of a better job of like describing day-to-day life and struggles compared to like pop culture is
Right.
at the representation. I think this is the stuff that people that work in the pop culture like ourselves is that where we can make a difference.
Agreed.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it's interesting. I like again, like I'm very happy that this exists for people to find familiarity, right, and to connect with their culture, to like learn a bit of what the history is, to learn a bit about like what life was before. And I do recommend the Cairo trilogy, even though it is similarly disquieting and like essential, like the Arab sort of the reality in Egypt as like a small family. At the same time, I wish I could point to more examples of like, and this is an example of how things in the Arab world are awesome too. And I can't come up with anything. There's not like the book that I would point at and be like, yeah, read that one. That's the cool stuff we do. I don't know. Stories always end with like, and then they move to the West.
Yeah.
Or they liberated themselves from their parents' values. And I guess
there's some work like so there's some graphic novels that I believe that just like describes the situation as is, and there's no liberation from the West. So like a good example of that would be a graphic novel by Joe Sacco called Palestine. And there's one by Guy Delisle, I think. I shouldn't pronounce some of those letters. I'm sorry. But he wrote a graphic novel called Jerusalem as well. And those are more like graphic novels are kind of describing the what they observed as they went through that area and their interviews with the people that live there from both sides, kind of thing.
Right.
So they're more like representation of the actual situation from their point of view, which is different than like, and then they moved somewhere else and lived happily ever after.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean that sounds amazing. I found that one. I'm ordering it now. Joe Sacco.
Joe Sacco, Palestine. It's pretty good. Yeah.
With a foreword by Edward Said. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Let's get that. But yeah, no. I mean, I wonder when that's going to happen, right? Because I do wonder about this every now and then, right? Like we're sitting here doing this podcast, and all three of us are diaspora, really, right? And I wonder, like, what opportunities are there for people that are in diaspora to tell their story? That one is a much more complicated question, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got language barrier, you've got access to opportunity, you've got access to funds, to resources, you've got sort of like the realities of life. And I mean, locally, obviously, there's a lot that gets done, right? It's not like there isn't its own media circle and there isn't its own sort of like Hollywood and awards and their own things that happen there. And, those are incredible work frequently. My dad would complain that the Nobel Prize only hasn't awarded more Arabs with Nobel Prize for literature because they don't read Arabic.
Yeah.
Right.
Fair.
But the reality is that those voices are rarely, if ever, heard. And whenever they get heard, it usually becomes political really quickly.
Yeah.
Because they get pushed into that corner.
I think
they get pushed back into that.
I think we're, given the situation in the Middle East, that there's a lot of focus and the successes and the pushes for individuals to have those stories locally without the the traditional move out and you'll get better successes.
Right.
Is happening in all other mediums outside of the artistic. To some extent, there are big successes happening on a business scale. Like there's giant businesses being sold. There's successful entrepreneurial companies, and then there's people finding success in the Olympics, for example. There's Olympics medals and all those kind of stuff. There are people that are succeeding within their work, and there's movie makers that are now making Oscar appearances. There was a Jordanian movie that got nominated to an Oscar and all of this. So. the foundation is needed for the artistic movement to really come in full swing. Right? It's
Right.
kind of like, what an Arab dad would tell you, like, why would you want to be a musician? You should be a doctor or an engineer first. You gotta, like, secure yourself from survival in order for you to be able to express yourself artistically. So, like, the people that make it to express themselves artistically from that part of the world, those are the ones that are like, above and beyond all odds. Right?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And those are the ones that we end up hearing about. So I think it will take for multiple waves of people that are really succeeding at business, at construction, at commerce, for the Arab artistic wave to kind of come flourishing forth as well.
Fawzi. Honestly, that's really smart.
Yeah. It'll, inshallah.
Yeah. It's not a question of if, it's when.
Right.
Yes.
It's inevitable.
Right.
Like you cannot stop change, you cannot stop progress. And the chances are, like with internet and all of that stuff, knowledge and information sharing is more access than ever before. It's about planets aligning and things happening at the right time. So, like,
right,
I'm not wishing for it. I am waiting for it.
certain. Yeah, you're certain of it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree. It makes me happy because there's a lot of beautiful things. There's a lot of incredible people. I do a lot of consultancies with small independent developers in the Arab world, and you just look at them and you're like, there's a lot of talent here, right? There's a lot of eagerness here. People want to make things. People want to prove that they can do these things. And I just can't wait to see that flourish, right? Like, it will pay off. Not for everybody, not right now, but it will eventually, and I think it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder what the Arab of the future looks like. Right?
Same here, man. Like, seriously, I can't wait. I remember, like, when we made our first game as indie developers, we went to Japan to try to publish it with because we thought, just make a game and Uncle Nintendo will publish it because that's how it works.
Yeah.
Right.
And I remember when we ended up, like, having a meeting with the Nintendo team, the publishing team at the time. They looked at us and they go, like, for us it was unheard of to see a team that from the Middle East. We didn't know that you guys even play games, let alone make them.
Right.
Wow.
And they were like, we were making games based on our culture for decades at this point, and we have been, like, super successful. And, like, we look at the West, and the West has been making games based on their culture, and they've been managing to export that as well. But they were like, you guys are coming in from a part of the world that we don't know much about. For you to be able to represent your culture in a product, that means that you have the potential to create something that the world has never seen before.
Right.
And, like, they can't. They're so excited because they couldn't imagine what that could be like.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
No, it's true.
I can't imagine what that's like. Can you show me your games that you made? I would love to play them. Yeah.
Good old indie games. Yeah, I don't know.
Games, exactly.
I do this thought experiment with a lot of people where I go, like, games are they represent the cultures that they're from, whether you want to or not, right?
Yeah.
Like, even if they're about other cultures, they still represent the cultures that they're from.
You're seeing it through a lens
because they're a
of
fingerprint,
someone,
right? They're a fingerprint of the people that made it. And I always ask people, like, do you think that if games started in the Arab world, that Mario would be running from right to left? Because that's the direction that we read in. And would it have changed anything?
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing to think about, because maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't. Like, maybe it wouldn't be Mario. I don't know. What would the Arab version of Mario be
Samir.
called? Samir?
Samir collecting falafels. That's what happened.
I thought you were going to go with Marwan, but okay.
Marwan
works.
also works.
Both work. It's Samir. Well, I guess it works.
Saeed.
It works. Yeah.
Saeed works. Saeed works.
Fair enough. Yeah. No, so it's an interesting thing to think about. I think there's a lot of cool things, and it's fun when you see, to bring it back to Arab towns for, like, one more moment. It's really fun to see what an Arab culture looks like when it has to celebrate its culture, to be distinct from what's around it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's very similar to what Osama was saying about, like, the French in Quebec being, like, extremely French, because they're surrounded by not French.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that French, you have like a piece of Arab that is really Arab because it has to be. And I saw that in my dad. In Egypt, he's way more chill about who he is than he is in the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands, he's the only one, right? In a lot of conversations. So he plays it up a little. While in the Netherlands, while in Egypt, he's just him.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't need to play anything up because everybody else is like him. And he doesn't have to downplay anything either because everybody else is like him. So it's interesting what that sort of like becomes like. And I'm curious to see that as, time goes forward and everything sort of like changes and the Arab people get more opportunity to speak openly. What that does to Arab culture when it doesn't feel like it's surrounded by things all the time anymore.
Under siege,
right?
All the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think this is a good spot to end this podcast.
I think so too.
Yep.
It's got really real.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, it's really tied really nicely. That's just a very, very fun conversation, you guys. We should talk about video games sometime.
What are video games?
What are video games?
Is that thing where you have an airplane?
That's right. That's right. We did talk about one video game.
Right, we did.
Yeah. So that's check off the mark. Now we can actually talk about the stuff we want to talk about. That's super cool. No, I had a lot of fun, guys. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and for joining us on this podcast. We'll see you next week with more of the Habibis. But for the time being, salam.
Salam.
That was the Habibis podcast for this week. I am Fawzi Masmar, your host for this episode. You can find me on Twitter at Fawzi Masmar. My fellow Habibis were Osama Dorias, who you can find on Twitter at Osama Dorias, and Rami Ismail, who you can find on Twitter at THA_Rami. Send us your questions, stories, and suggestions via info@thehabibis.com. Intro and outro music was provided by Malik Zubayla, and the logo was provided by Ibrahim Hamdi. The Habibis is a weekly podcast about 3 game developers drinking good Arab tea, with new episodes launching every Friday, inshallah. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe to your favorite podcasting service, or check out thehabibis.com for more information. Thank you for listening. Salam.